1992, that was the last time an Englishman won the league title in the English First Division, and that was Howard Wilkinson with Leeds United. Since then, no English manager has won the Premier League title. We've seen one Spaniard win it in Pep Guardiola, we've seen 4 Italians in Ranieri, Conte, Ancelotti and Roberto Mancini, 1 German, Jurgen Klopp of course, 1 Portuguese, Jose Mourinho, 1 Chilean, Manuel Pellegrini, 2 Scottish, Dalglish and Alex Ferguson, and then 1 French in Arsene Wenger. But considering England is classed as the home of football, and we, maybe delusionally so, always see ourselves as winning the Euros or the World Cup, why has there been no English manager that has won the league? Let's start with the basics of it, and that is the UEFA Pro Licence. The UEFA Pro Licence is a mandatory qualification for coaches to work in a national league within Europe. And if we want to get to the bare bones of it, in a study in 2017, it found out that there were 383 pro licensed football coaches in the UK, whereas in Spain there was 2,379. Germany a bit less with 861, Italy 826, and even Portugal there's 586, which it's just a huge disparity between the two. From the base numbers of it, if there are over 2,000 Spanish coaches, by the law of averages, a lot of them are going to be better than the 383 pro licensed in England. And there's a question why there's so many more, and I think one of the main reasons is cost. In the UK it is 10k for a pro license, whereas if you go to Spain or Germany, you're looking at about 5 to 6k in euros. So it's a huge difference, and you can see why it seems to be a lot more affordable for people across Europe. And I do believe it because I know people who have done similar courses to the UEFA Pro one. You meet people along the way, you meet people with new ideas, new management styles, new man management styles, and everything in between. And if there are only a small group of people getting together in the UK learning from each other, if, like I said, if there's 2,000 people learning from each other in Spain, the ideas are going to be going so much more. And I do think this links with language, because obviously in England, most people, I'm only speaking from my experience, aren't bilingual. We learn English obviously from a young age, and you might learn a bit of French in primary school, and then it's mandatory from, I believe, year 7 and 8, maybe 9, and then it's optional. However, in European countries, I believe English is actually mandatory until the age of 18 in certain places. If a Spanish coach, if a German coach, if an Italian coach, if they're maybe fed up of working in their native country, if they're not getting the opportunities, they can move across to England because they can speak to the players. Whereas if the English managers moved across to Spain or Italy, they might struggle with the language barrier. And of course that means they can't learn from these other places, they can't get a better job, maybe develop themselves in different countries and then take their talents back to England. Because obviously if you're a chairman in the Premier League and you have an Arsene Wenger who is apparently fluent in 7 languages, and then you have a Steve Bruce who is barely fluent in 1 language, if their CV is the exact same, you might pick the person who is bilingual or multilingual. They'll be able to speak to foreign players in the Premier League, because obviously globalisation of the Premier League has brought in so many great foreign players. They need to be able to be spoken to, and if an English manager can't speak to them and can't get the point across, it might help getting someone from another country. And speaking of chairman, if we're looking at owners in the Premier League, I believe only 4 out of the 20 owners are English majority shareholders, which it's insane because obviously in the 80s and 90s it was completely different. Because now I do believe it's quite a lot of Americans, but they will have their own ideas, they all have their own network that they can use. Former Man United and Everton defender Phil Neville said, the biggest single reason why there are more foreign managers is foreign ownership. A lot of these owners attach themselves to a particular agent who has foreign managers on the books, and then that agent will promote their own. In Europe, Spain and Italy in particular, they'll give opportunities to their own managers rather than bringing someone in from the outside. And at the end of the day, that's their prerogative. If they have someone who they think will be better, if they have someone who they're more connected to, then that's their God-given right to choose that person. It doesn't mean they have to choose an Englishman. However, this could be a reason why there are less English managers who are being successful in the Premier League. But does it come down to the perception of these managers? Because I do think, and this is self-inflicted as well, there is an arrogance towards English managers in the Premier League. Sam Allardyce is the biggest example. The back end of his career, he was brought in as a relegation dodger. You know, last season at Leeds, he had to try and get them out of the hole that they were in unsuccessfully. But before that, when he was at someone like Bolton, he was actually quite ahead of his time with sports science, because apparently during his playing career, where he played in America for Tampa Bay Rowdies, he actually experienced a lot more of the progressive sports science that they have in America. He even said in his autobiography that he had 3 masseurs when he was in Tampa Bay, which was 3 more than he had when he played back in England. And obviously every team in the world who will have multiple physios and everything like that. But back in the 80s when Sam Allardyce was playing, that didn't happen really, and I'm sure he brought a lot of that into his management for Bolton. Even former Bolton player Michael Bridges said, "He opened my eyes to a whole different side of football, the nutrition, the analysis, the way he monitored the players. We had studies on the opposition players, we had seminars on nutrition. Sam was streets ahead of his time." Which is funny because nowadays he's seen as the person you meet down the chippy, and obviously he doesn't help himself with the podcast on No Tippy Tappy Football. But he does argue what is good football, because I think people see English old-fashioned football 4-4-2 as the Antichrist, but let's look at Jose Mourinho when he came in 2004. They defended so well. What did they concede? 15 goals in a Premier League season, which is just mind-blowing. But some would argue that is very defensive, anti-football. But because it won titles, then it's seen as really progressive. And I think you could argue this is part of the problem, because someone like a Gary O'Neill, for example, Bournemouth last season, he defied all odds. Everyone thought Bournemouth were going to finish rock bottom, including myself. And he did a really good job with them. And now he's at Wolves because he got sacked from Bournemouth, as they chose to bring in Spanish coach Iraola, who is very new as well. He only had a couple of seasons at Rayo Vallecano, I believe. And I really like Iraola. I think he's a fantastic coach, and I think he's going to do great things in his career already. I mean, Bournemouth look fantastic. But it just shows that having maybe a European coach is seen as more sexier than having just one from England. Because obviously Gary O'Neill, he wasn't a spectacular player. He was just a average Premier League player. And Bournemouth might have felt that Iraola brought more of a suave, a bit more of an elegance to the club. And apparently that came in the late 90s when a certain Frenchman came into Arsenal called Arsene Wenger, and he completely switched the Premier League, turned it upside down. And former chief executive of Liverpool, Rick Parry, said that Wenger made everyone second guess their clubs. Liverpool brought in Houllier at back end of the 90s, and he said that we wanted to bring in someone from overseas, wanted to add that European dimension. That was a very deliberate decision. We felt the game was very internationalising and that you just couldn't survive with an island league. You had to be aware of what was happening across the borders and be able to compete with European clubs. We felt we needed that European experience to add to a successful base. It looks like it was partly due to a fear factor. It was a fear factor of getting left behind from people like Arsene Wenger, who was bringing in new ideas from France in Monaco, and they didn't want to stay with the traditional 4-4-2 that everyone's so scared of. But it's interesting because there's always the obvious joke that if Sam Allardyce thinks someone said if he was Sam Allardyce, then he'd be classed as an absolute genius. Someone like Eddie Howe, I really believe that does affect him a bit, because last season especially, I think Eddie Howe made Newcastle into a juggernaut of a team. They were so energetic, they were so attacking, and their defence was just fantastic. If that was a manager from Spain or Italy, it'd been seen as revolutionary at the time to take a team like Newcastle to the Champions League. However, because it's Eddie Howe, and he looks basically like your PE teacher from year 9, I do believe the accomplishment is seen as a bit lesser so. And I mean, if you take a player like Dan Burn and you put him in a Champions League qualifying squad, in the starting 11 at left back, it's an incredible achievement that I think does go somewhat underlooked. And I do think a lot of English managers, because they don't go abroad a lot of the time, they don't learn the language.
Liverpool or Arsenal, I thought maybe one of them we would draw, and it is Arsenal, I think.
That is quite self-inflicting as their fault. They might think the other leagues are a bit beneath them and they want to try for the Championship in the Premier League. They're only really going to get a job in the Premier League if they were an ex-player like a Lampard or a Gerrard. And even still, they had to make their way at Derby and Rangers. Or you grow through the EFL, you grow through League One Championship. Someone like Kieran McKenna, for example, at Ipswich, he's done a fantastic job with them, back-to-back promotions. And I really think they'll have one season up, and they'll either get relegated or stay up, but I think the season after that, he is going to a bigger club if he does a fairly decent job. And that seems to be the only way you're really going to get a higher job in the league. But unfortunately, there is some sort of a ceiling, I think, for English managers, because if you are good enough, like a Eddie Howe, a Graham Potter, you are tipped for the England job every single day of your managerial career. And that's rightly so, because we are crying out for a revolutionary manager. I like Gareth Southgate, and he's taken us as far as he could go. He might win the Euros this summer, fantastic. But everyone wants that person who's going to bring this great football to the nation. And anytime an English manager shows a bit of promise, they're tipped for it, which puts so much pressure on them. And I think sometimes they might not even want it. And when you have 281 English players in the Premier League compared to 429 Spanish players in La Liga, you can see why a Spanish coach might be more appropriate to the La Liga teams instead of an English coach towards the Premier League teams. I think the Premier League has just become too big, and it's a close shot basically, isn't it? The top six pretty much get the top 6 places, with give or take maybe Villa or Newcastle. And with that, there aren't many managers that can really break into the higher roles, because if you're in Crystal Palace or Bournemouth or Wolves, for example, you're going to struggle really to get a top 6 finish, which might put a bit more on your CV, which then you can apply for these top teams. But like I say, you can't just blame everything else. English managers have to take responsibility, and I do think there was a bit of a crop of English managers coming through with Gerrard, with Lampard. They weren't terrible, they had something about them, but maybe they should have taken a leaf out of Xabi Alonso's book, where he's rejected big offers to stay at Bayer Leverkusen because he's won the league this season, he has done an incredible job, but he's realised, which I believe he said in an interview, he doesn't know everything yet, he needs to learn his craft, further his career, and then when a Real Madrid come in 2 or 3 years, he backs his abilities to do that. I listened to interviews of Lampard and he said Chelsea, he just couldn't turn it down. But if you're a man confident in your abilities, surely he could have tried to get Derby up when they lost in the playoff final, or surely Gerrard could have tried to further his career of Rangers and got them into the Champions League or further their career there. And I think because there's so much pressure on English managers when they take a big job, 99% of the time it's going to fail tremendously. Graham Potter for Chelsea, for example, he took that job far too soon, but I'm sure to him, life-changing money, it was a big opportunity. But it's probably put him back about 5 years because he took that job. But we'll see. I think there still is a good crop of managers. Gary O'Neill is probably my favourite in the league, maybe Eddie Howe. But let me know what you think. Let me know what you think of English managers. Are they in decline? Do you think one will ever win the Premier League? Or do you think it will just constantly be foreign managers? But yeah, if you could leave a like on the video, if you could leave a comment like I said, and if you could subscribe, that would really help me out. But thanks for watching.